Welcome to The Catch Up, a podcast from the Daily Catch where we take you inside the news. My name is Walter Mullen, and I'm the publisher of the Daily Catch.
And I'm Emily Sachar, the editor of the Daily Catch.
In this podcast, we discuss stories that have appeared in the Daily Catch. We give you insights into how we put them together, offer additional observations, and discuss where the stories may be heading as we move forward. And a quick reminder to listeners, if you like our broadcast, please be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite platform so you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. Emily, it's time to catch up.
It is, Walter. Let's do it.
So, Emily, we've talked about many things on this show, but today is a first for us. Today, we're talking about slime, but not just any old slime. It's the beautiful, swishy, phosphorescent green slime that now runs up and down the Hudson River from Poughkeepsie to Hudson. And you've got a special guest who's going to help explain all this to our listeners. I'm going to let you take it from here.
So, Walter, yes, today we have a very special guest. We have the mayor of Rhinebeck, Gary Bassett, who also holds another very important title relative to the topic for today. He is the founder and the chair of the Hudson Seven, a group of 7 municipalities that derive their drinking water from the Hudson. So welcome, Gary Bassett, for coming on the show. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for including me on this really important subject as well.
So let's take our listeners back, Gary, to the very first moment when you first realized or first heard that there was an algae bloom on the Hudson, this particular round. Tell us about that.
Sure. So this came through not through my office here as mayor of Village of Rhinebeck, but it came through my correspondence as part of the Hudson Seven. And we first got notified Monday, September 9th, by the town of Esopus. They were seeing some slime, green slime, in their plant. And they've never experienced having that slime come through the intakes into their sediment tanks. So we're very concerned about what it was. They quickly notified Dan Shapley, who I think most people know. Dan being a very highly qualified person on all things relating to water and part of Riverkeeper, immediately went to check to see what it was and traveled along the shoreline to examine it. And Dan called me directly from the shoreline with his observations of this algae bloom and his concern about what it was and how it was manifesting itself and what it could do. Because as the Hudson Seven, we really have blinders on as to, we think of the Hudson River as a source of drinking water. You have the DEC who cares about the fish and the habitats and the land, right? And then you have Department of Health, which cares about the finished water product. But the reason I started this organization 7 years ago was because nobody thought of the Hudson River as a source of drinking water. And so that ignited us. And that was a huge concern. And I'll be honest with you, I've known Dan now for a long time. I've never seen him so concerned as I was then. And because, again, none of us knew what it was, but we knew that we needed to figure it out.
Okay, let me interject for just a second. So Esopus, of course, is a town on the other side of the river from Red Hook and Rhinebeck, correct?
Correct. So let me go back. Within the Hudson Seven, there's the 7 municipalities plus the 2 counties, but we have 5 water treatment plants. Mm-hmm. On the east side of the river, we have, starting here at the north end, which is the Village of Rhinebeck treatment plant. Then we have Hyde Park, and then the city and town of Poughkeepsie. On the west side of the river, we have Esopus and Lloyd. They're the 5 plants that process all the water that 100,000 people get out of the river in this area.
Okay. And you mentioned slime building up. I think you called it an intake valve. So I take it this is the water that comes in from the Hudson. We shouldn't expect it to be clean, right? We shouldn't expect that. So if we don't expect it to be clean, why was it such a worry that we had the slime in the first place?
So again, one is the extent of what Dan was observing. Mm-hmm. His first concern was, beside the drinking water, next concern was his concern for what certain algae of this look like could be hazardous to humans and or to animals. Mm-hmm. And even while he was on the phone, there was a person going to the shoreline wanting to let their dog swim, and we interrupted the call to tell that person, please keep your dog out till we understand what's going on. So it has in itself a lot of issues that could be correlated to when this occurs. And now, again, algae blooms are common. They happen this time of year. They happen when the weather's warm. They happen when we have drought conditions. This is in a concern by itself. We always look for algae blooms, and you look for that blue-green color because that's a highlight that you want to look. And this had this blue-green kind of color to it, more of a phosphorus green, but it was also getting into the water plant, and it was a quite large extended area. And as we've now come to realize, this is probably the largest algae bloom that we have on record. And so our records go back, or their records go back 40 years. And to see something of this magnitude is unprecedented, which is another cause for concern, because given the size and the color and everything associated with it, we don't have a precedent to set to say this is what we did then. So we are venturing into new territory. Yeah. Get back to your question about the intakes. Yes, all of the 5 plants have intakes that are well out into the river, hundreds of feet into the river, and they rest closely to the bottom of the river. And this stuff floats on the top, but our intakes are pulling in hundreds of thousands of gallons, but they're pulling this green algae into the intake at the bottom of the river, which says that it's quite prolific in the river itself. So that ignited the alarm and said, we need to figure out what this is.
Okay. So next step that you or /Dan of Riverkeeper took was what? To test the water?
Yeah. So the next step was you need to work in partnership with a lot of people on the river. I mentioned DEC and DOH. They are our partners in terms of managing what's happening in the river. So we immediately, through Riverkeeper, which Dan is, let me back up. Dan is a technical advisor for the Hudson Seven and also on Riverkeeper. So that's how Dan and I are connected through the Hudson Seven. We said, listen, let's get the authorities involved. Let's make sure we understand what this is. Let's get Department of Health involved. And Riverkeeper by itself has the ability to do testing. So they were a quick response to get Riverkeeper to get their boats out and start taking samples of what they were seeing in the river and get them analyzed while we were waiting for DOH to mobilize. And also, because DOH cares about the output, Riverkeeper could sample it on the intake side and see what they see. And their test came back positive for the cybertoxins or the bacteria that can be part of algae blooms. And that then is the real alarm. We can take care of this if it's just slime coming into the river, into our intakes, that'll settle out in through our processes and everything. But if there's a bacteria, we need to know what the bacteria is so that we know how to effectively treat it.
Okay, I want to talk about the treatment, but I want to also make sure our listeners know DOH is Department of Health.
Department of Health.
And their role here is they care about the drinking water, the quality of the drinking water?
Yes. If you think about the Department of Health, there's the local county Department of Health, which we called, and then there's the New York State Department of Health, which we also called to get engaged. They care about the finished product, which is the finished water coming out of the water treatment plants. Mm-hmm. That's their concern. Okay. And that's what we need to make sure. Hudson Seven, we care about the drinking water.
Got it. And Riverkeeper, you've mentioned them now a couple of times. What do they do? And I know Carey Institute was also involved.
Yeah. So Riverkeeper being another active partner with us when we started the Hudson Seven, Riverkeeper has been monitoring the river for years. They have a boat, used to be captained by Captain John Liscombe, who's now retired, but the boat is taken over. And they do regular samples of the river all along to test the quality of the river for contaminants in the river that they're doing. And they have a field of volunteers that just do lakes and streams and the river that collect the water samples, send them to their laboratory to be analyzed so we understand the health of the river. I always tell everybody the river it's a living thing and it's changing constantly. And without their help as being eyes on the boots on the ground, but in this case it's boats in the water, we don't know what's happening in a river as much as we would like to know. And so they're an extremely valuable partner in working with us on the river. And they communicate directly with DEC and predominantly as well.
Okay. And did you talk about Carey Institute?
Oh, no, I didn't. I'm sorry. So the Carey Institute came in as a fact of Riverkeeper engaged them and said, hey, You're a scientific organization. Let's bring your expertise into this as well. It's so great to have organizations like this that can work together collaboratively to immediately address these kind of symptoms that are unprecedented and that we've seen in our history that are happening in our region.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now, Gary, you find out or you hear back from Dan that, oh no, this is a harmful algae bloom, an HAB, as opposed to a non-harmful
Yes,
algae bloom.
yes.
Two things for you. What was your next move in terms of the drinking water in Rhinebeck?
So, Department of Health, we immediately, although as we talked about before, we were seeing it on the western shore, but from the shore, on the eastern shore, we could see it. It wasn't at our intake, but we could see it in the river. So we wanted to immediately, which we did, get DOH, because DOH will actually come and now take samples as well. Riverkeeper's doing it in a river. DOH does it on your finished product, right? So DOH comes into your plant, takes samples, send them to our lab, and they can determine exactly what you're dealing with and what you're seeing. And what's important, and that's what's important, because you need to understand how to treat it if you don't have a process to treat it. And in this case, we are so fortunate that the existing process that all of us have, the 5 water treatment plants have, their normal process are treating this bacteria, and it therefore becomes undetectable in the finished water. So it essentially is being removed as it goes through the various stages in our drinking water processes.
So was the Rhinebeck water at intake also containing the problem?
Within a matter of 24 hours, we are seeing it in our plant.
In our
So
plant?
yes. So
Okay.
in the Village of Rhinebeck plant, within a matter of 24 hours, we are starting to see it come in through the intakes, come into our sediment tanks, and floating to the surface in our sediment tanks.
Okay. And you're saying that Rhinebeck, the treatment plant that you supervise essentially, was able to treat this. Tell us whether or how you knew that you could effectively treat this particular problem.
We did. That's what's really exciting. That's was the most concerning thing. We didn't know if we could treat it because we didn't know what it was, and we didn't know once we found out what we would have to do. And that's where the scientists come in. I'm not a scientist. We rely on our scientists. Carey Institute would be a great resource for this, but so would New York State Department of Health, who could guide us if there was additional processes that needed to be put in place. In this case, we did not need to implement any additional processes into our treatment plants to be able to effectively remove what was coming into our intakes and into our finished water. There was no change made.
It sounds like we were very lucky.
We
right?
are. We were extremely, extremely fortunate to know that very quickly, within a matter of 2 days, we knew what we were dealing with and what was happening in our water treatment plants. To know that we were protected, but that doesn't mean you stop. Right? You don't stop just because you have one sample that says you're good to go. You need to continuously test, continually monitor, and make sure that the process is working because things change.
How often are you normally testing the input and the output from the water
So
system?
normally it's weekly, but in this case, we went to daily testing.
And are you still in daily testing?
We still are doing daily testing, yes.
How are those?
Until we can see what happens here, we're doing daily testing, and I believe all the other plants are as well. How are those tests going? They're going, so far, again, our process is working as it should be and is removing the toxins from the raw water and they're undetectable in our treatment water.
And you're not seeing new kinds of blooms,
No,
kinds of
no.
toxins showing up.
no, nothing has changed in the makeup of this harmful algae bloom,
Fantastic.
which I'm so thankful for. I'm
Yeah.
very, very, very happy because again, I'm going to say there was nothing we can't go back in history. There was nothing to compare to.
Yes.
We couldn't go back and say, how do we treat this? And then what did we do before to handle it? It was brand new. Everything was new to try to understand what we were doing.
So, Mayor, tell our listeners, What caused this algae bloom to form? Do we know?
Well, as I mentioned, the algae blooms are common.
Mhm.
This time of year, especially as weeds are dying off, I forget the term, apology, but it's, as weeds die off and they settle in and they form these algae compost, it really is affected by drought conditions and high temperatures. And we've had both. We're in a severe drought, which is affecting the water flow, and we're also into very abnormal high temperatures in the latter part of the summer and the beginning of fall here that really make this manifest itself into something larger.
Mhm.
So, and the scientists tell us that this is a result of climate change, and climate change has caused these seasonal conditions that we're probably going to see more of going forward in the future.
That's where I was going to head next with my questions was, so this one wasn't a problem. You have the systems to treat it.
Right.
Do you need, because of global warming and because of the trends we're seeing, to make amends or to make some changes or upgrades so we can treat the next more harmful algae bloom that comes our way?
What will it be? That's the question. What will it be? We don't know what it will be. But what we're all looking at, and I hope every other water treatment plants are, is what we were just starting to discuss is our emergency response plans. If there is another one and it gets into our intake and we can't treat it and we don't want to get it into our transmission lines, what are we going to do? How do we keep supply of water so everybody can have what they need? Here in the village of Rhinebeck, we're fortunate. We have a 3 to 4 day supply of water that will get us through, and we have a backup plan to bring outside water in to continue to supply water to our village and town residents. But it's great that I think this made us bring attention to, are those plans effective enough for what's going to happen next?
It's almost like this was a dress rehearsal
Could
for
be.
a disaster.
Could be, right? And you can say that's true of everything that we've seen in a result of climate change.
Mhm.
Look at the fires that we're seeing, right, across the nation. And who has suspected that, last year we had fires here in our region. You never think of that. You think of it, okay, it's always somewhere else. It's not going to happen here, but it is happening here. And so the effects of climate change are really starting to show in a lot of ways, besides what we've been talking about with sea level rise and temperature increases and all that. We're seeing other effects of the result of climate change, which could have a long range impact on providing clean air and clean water, which is what we care about.
So you mentioned Rhinebeck has 6,000 people on this water system. I take it there are some who don't, some who have wells or who have other mechanisms for getting their water in Rhinebeck, correct?
That is correct. We serve all the residents and all the businesses in the village of Rhinebeck, and then we serve populated areas in the town of Rhinebeck, like the hamlet of Rhinecliff is on our water distribution system, right? Subdivisions like the gardens, which are between Rhinecliff and Rhinebeck, are on our water systems.
Okay, great. And for our listeners, Red Hook is not on Hudson River water. Red Hook has wells, and Red Hook itself, it's the water that's supplied by the town, also taps wells to access the water,
Correct.
access the water table.
Yeah, their reservoirs are wells. Ours is your river.
Okay. So before we wrap up, what else should our listeners know about what happened here? Is there anything you want them to be mindful of, etc.?
The two things that we talked about. Number one is if you see something, say something. If you see these occurrences in the river, please reach out to us. We have a Hudson Seven website with an email, and the correspondents are called Department of Health, call DEC directly. We are all working collaboratively together to find these and locate them and understand what their impacts are, because it's important to know, and we're not on the river all the time. We know what we're getting in, but the observation really can come from the river. So if you see something, say something. That's the first tool that we should try to address. The second thing is, if there is something, think about the care of yourself and the care of your animals, right? because we'll take care of number one. You notify us, we'll address the drinking water. But number two, you saw where the Kingston swimming has closed their beaches right away because of this. And that's because of the early notification system. We can have an effective communication once we know to get it out to everybody, regardless of whether they have drinking water from the river. Those who are using and enjoying our river need to understand that.
Okay, great. Well, it was absolutely a treat to have you on the show.
I'm glad you've taken interest to this topic. It's important. It's important for your listeners to know that their water is safe. It's important for them to know that there's a lot of people working collaboratively together to make sure that their water is safe and that we care.
Yeah. And to not take for granted what we have. This is a tremendous resource. That river does so much for so many. And it's not just a pretty river to look at or a pretty river to watch boats go down. It's an essential part of our lives.
Right. 7 years ago, I always say this, Emily, because 7 years ago, if you would have asked people where they get their drinking water from, I'm not trying to be facetious here, but they would say, well, it comes out of the faucet. Right? And, which is good because I want them not to have to care, right? But I also want them to know that, there are natural elements here, which are the drinking water, which we get from the Hudson River. And people didn't realize that their water came from the river. And now they do. Not only do we know regionally, they now know at the state level and they now know at the federal level. And if you talk to any of our state representatives or our federal representatives that are here in the region, they are now aware of what the Hudson Seven is and what we do and how we are working to protect it as a source of drinking water.
Well, thanks to you for starting the Hudson Seven. Thanks for teaching me today that 100,000 people in those communities are drinking water off the Hudson River. I did not know that, and I suspect most of our listeners didn't. So thanks again.
All good. Very well. Have a great day, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for being on the show.
So that was interesting to hear Gary's insights on this problem. But my big takeaway is I'm just happy to know our drinking water is safe.
That's right. And we also can remember that not everybody who listens to this podcast in the Hudson Valley has drinking water coming from the Hudson River.
That's a good point. So now let's transition to our question for the day, Emily. This is going to be kind of a dual question. We like to give listeners insights into how our stories come together. And yesterday we had an interesting story about cars being towed at the Amtrak Rhinecliff station in preparation for the planned parking lot repavement. Let's explain to listeners exactly how that story unfolded. So step number one, we got a tip from Matty Rosenberg, our producer here on the Catch Up, that many cars were being towed away from the station. Step number two, I happened to be taking a southbound train down to the city yesterday afternoon. And while I was waiting for my train on the platform, I saw some of the cars being towed. And then a couple of hours later, you yourself went down to the station to do the story. What were you expecting to find when you got there? And then how did the story play out?
Yeah. So initially, Walter, I was planning to do a story, like a traditional news story about all the cars that were being towed. I was hoping that by the time I got there, I might actually meet up with somebody whose car was in the midst of being towed or who had arrived at the station to discover they had no vehicle. And I thought that would be the human interest story we would do. And I would find out how many cars had been towed, which actually Matty had been tracking for us during the day. But when I got there, something very interesting happened. I, first of all, didn't find any people arriving off of trains. I got there about 5:45. No one was arriving off of a train at that moment. And there were no cars being towed any longer. I asked an Amtrak supervisor, foreman on the job, and he said, oh, no, we've been done with the towing for a while. So I'm thinking to myself, well, what's my story? I wanted to do something. I wanted to do something interesting and compelling. So I took a picture of the sign on the fence that says, if your car has been towed, call X number, call this phone number. And I called, and lo and behold, the owner of the tow company picked up the phone. And I said, what's happening with the towing? And he said, oh, well, we're done with the towing. But you know what? You can come out and see the cars. We towed 23 cars today. And I said, well, where is that? And he gives me the address. I think it was like 2737 Route 9G. So I said, sure, I'll hightail it over there and I'll take a picture and maybe I'll find somebody over there whose car has been towed. So I get there and I meet his partner. So John's Towing has the contract, apparently, I learned yesterday, to tow cars off the Rhinecliff lot. And he does this business, Mr. John, with his nephew, whose name is also John, coincidentally, John Huddock. And I found John Huddock at the site where I went to on the Route 9G site where cars were being loaded up. And I asked him, well, tell me, like, it must have been a really hard day. You must have been dealing with a lot of angry people. Well, no, Walter, he says, actually, people have been very lovely. And I said, well, why is that? And he said, well, we're just trying to do this with a lot of heart and a lot of care. And I thought, well, that's interesting. How many of us have had our cars towed, Walter? Have you ever had your car towed?
I had my car towed.
Have you ever had your car towed in, for example, Brooklyn?
No, not Brooklyn.
Or New York, where you go and first of all, you're going to pay, some crazy fee, like $375. And then they're going to charge you a fee to get your car. And then they're going to charge you the fee for holding your car. So, you're up to like $600 just to get your car out of the lot and so on. So he says, well, actually, people have been really nice. And he said, but one of the reasons is we're doing this kind of towing with heart program. So I said, can you give me an example? So he tells me the story of a guy who found out from Amtrak yesterday morning that he was getting towed. And he called the number that Amtrak gave him. He called the tow company and said, I'm in Boston. I'm not getting home for several days. I don't even know exactly when I'm getting home. But would you be so kind as to take my car to my house? Can you imagine, Walter? Can you friggin' imagine? That's what rural tow companies apparently do, or at least what this one did. And then he told me about another story, a guy who is an executive in Manhattan and expected to be home very late, but he was going to make it home and didn't want to pay the full day towing or didn't want to pay a second day of holding charge. So he asked if he could come to the guy's house at 11 o'clock or 11:30 and pick up his car. And he was told yes to that too. So lesson from me, Walter, and I'm curious what your takeaway is from this, but my lesson was sometimes the story just isn't what you think it's going to be. And I still, of course, wanted to weave in the data that Matty had gathered, the 23 cars, and I'd gotten some more information from John Huddock's mother, who coincidentally had also called me in the interim. And I was able to work it into a nice little feature story. So sometimes things are not as they appear.
Well, I think that's a good point. We often tell our reporters to keep an open mind when you're going into a story. You may think you're going in to report one story, but you have to be open to what you're finding. And in the case of yesterday, we found the tow guy with a heart of gold. So that was the story.
Exactly. You're so right. And we do try to have our ears open all the time and to prepare for the unexpected, right? To try to not be so rigid. I can be quite rigid. You know that about me. But I could, quite set in what I want to do. But if I keep myself soft and open, sometimes I get a better story.
Exactly. Wonderful. I think the paving is going to be done this week, but we'll keep following the Amtrak story, which always warms the bottom of my heart.
Because Walter, need at least one Amtrak story a week.
One Amtrak story a week.
Readers know that about you.
One Amtrak story a week makes me very happy. So this concludes our episode of The Catch Up. We hope you enjoyed listening. Again, if you like our broadcast, please be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite platform, and you'll be notified every time we drop a new episode. Big thank you to Matty Rosenberg and Jen Hammoud at Radio Free Rhinecliff for their help in producing today's episode, and a big thank you to Esther Martell for her help with editing. Emily, it's always a pleasure to catch up.
It's always a pleasure, Walter.